Hey, ladies and gentlemen, have you been to the gas pump recently? Have you had an SUV fill up if you want something that'll really be heart-stopping? Well, the pain at the pump means gas prices are at their highest levels in 4 months after going up 33 straight days.
Well, the average price of gas is 43 cents higher than a month ago, and it could be on its way to $4 a gallon. Ephraim Graham tells us why that's happening.
If you've had to fill up your car lately, you've likely noticed that the price just keeps going up.
It jumps almost every 2 days, it seems like.
Oh my goodness. So I'm at 64. It usually takes me like 50 bucks to fill up.
Experts say the end is not in sight yet.
It'll probably be at least a couple more months before things start to look more normal.
They blame the price hike on a number of factors. Refineries are switching over from winter to summer fuel, which is more expensive to produce, refinery closings, and an increase in the demand for gas. Another reason? Crude oil prices are up. Canada's ambassador to the U.S. pointed out in a recent interview, Canada has a surplus of oil, and if President Obama approves the Keystone Pipeline, Canada's oil can help meet the U.S. demand.
He's a rational, logical person. I believe that the rationale for having Canadian oil and North Dakota and Montana oil going on a pipeline instead of on trucks and trains to the Gulf Coast is logical.
The administration is supposed to reach a decision on the pipeline by spring. In the meantime, experts predict fuel prices in the U.S. will rise another 40 to 60 cents. But there are some things you can do to help improve your car's mileage. Obey the speed limit, make sure your gas cap is on tight, and clear out anything unnecessary in your trunk. Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
I'm sure clearing out your trunk will save you tremendous amounts of money.
I was thinking the same thing.
$4 a gallon and rising. But you know, in European standards, this is relatively cheap. Our gasoline here is quite modestly priced. But the refineries, God bless them, take advantage of every opportunity they get. And if there's a shortage, if one refinery gets blown up or goes offline, then they all raise their prices. It doesn't cost them one bit more, but they all raise their prices. So anyway, they say, what's the summer shift, and we've got to close down refineries for maintenance and all that kind of stuff.
Well, in summers when people are out there in their vehicles taking family vacations.
They just thought that now's the chance to gouge the consumer, but well, they need their profits too. Well, the oil and gas industries are part of another budget battle in Washington over spending and taxes. Lee Webb has that story from the CBN newsroom. Here, Lee.
Pat, President Obama is pushing congressional Republicans to accept more taxes as part of a deal to avoid across-the-board budget cuts. Those cuts are called the sequester, of course, and they will go into effect March 1st unless the White House and Congress come up with a deal. Democrats want to raise money by closing tax loopholes on some businesses like the oil and gas industries, and they want to tax millionaires at a rate of at least 30%. Republicans say they went along with tax hikes as part of the fiscal cliff deal earlier this year. Now they say it's time to focus on spending cuts. Will they hold the president's feet to the fire on that, though, Pat? That's the big question.
Well, we hope they've got some backbone and they'll stand up, because this sequester isn't all that bad. When you look at what's happening, it's minuscule in light of the huge federal budget. I mean, maybe $100 billion will be taken out of spending over the next 12 months or something. It's not catastrophic. They make it sound horrible, like we won't be able to sail our ships or fly our airplanes or train our troops. That's nonsense. They need some cuts. This is discipline, and it was brought on, I might add, by the Obama administration. Now they're having to bear the consequences of their own acts. And they're screaming like, isn't this awful, and shouldn't the Republicans do something? Let's raise taxes. And the Republicans had better say no. Lee?
Pat, law enforcement officials think they know why Adam Lanza opened fire on that elementary school in Connecticut in December. They believe he was motivated by violent video games and the desire to beat another mass murderer. Lanza killed 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School. CBS News reports that 2 officials say Lanza wanted to surpass the body count of Norwegian killer Anders Breivik. He killed 77 people 2 years ago. Lanza reportedly chose Sandy Hook because it was, quote, the easiest target with the largest cluster of people. The officials also believe Lanza was living out a fantasy based on violent video games he played in his home. They found a number of those games in a blacked-out room in his basement where he reportedly spent hours playing them alone, Pat.
You know, Lee, I think this is the heart of the problem. All this business about assault weapons and a ban on weapons and a ban on clips and how many bullets you can put in a clip and all that, it misses the point. 2 things are responsible for most of these killings. Number one, the psychotropic drugs that are being administered to children all across America. And a lot of them have lost sense of reality because they are doped up with the various feel-good medicines that are currently being prescribed. So that's number one. Number two, they're exposed to these video games and they lose touch with reality. All of a sudden, they enter into these things, and the idea is bang, bang, you're dead, and it's a game, but they don't understand. You can't translate a game into real life, but they try to do it. So somebody, quote, blows away the enemy, then they get on a street corner and they, quote, blow away people with some gun. But it's not the guns. It is the crazy video, and it is the psychedelic-type drugs administered by doctors. And if we deal with those things, the chances are these killings would slow down, maybe stop entirely. We hope so.
Mm-hmm. You know, mental health is really at the base of what you're talking about.
It is. Oh. You know, they're doing something in New York, by the way, they should have done a long time ago. The Supreme Court ruled that you couldn't hold mentally disturbed people in some kind of protective situation, that it violated their rights. They didn't have proper trials and all this. So you've got all these crazy people, mentally disturbed people, wandering the streets. They're out begging. They, you know, one of them was pushed bystander before the tracks of a speeding subway train. And so New York says, well, let's go out and find these people and get them off the streets. Well, you don't get them off the streets. You put them into some kind of protective situation where they can be cared for. The Supreme Court blew it. You have these rulings from these, you know, 5 old men in black robes, and they make these decisions, and it sounds so noble when lawyers are trying these cases, but they don't look at the consequences of what their acts are. And we've got to do something with the mentally ill people. We can't allow them just to wander the streets. You can't do it. So New York says, let's round them all up. Well, I don't know whether they're violating somebody's civil rights or not, but the nanny state is an operation, and New York people like Mayor Bloomberg. Lee.
Pat, China's military is behind a massive computer hacking campaign against U.S. targets. That's the conclusion of a 60-page detailed report compiled by a U.S. internet security company called Mandiant. They have traced more than 140 major cyber attacks to a unit of China's military based in Shanghai. The targets included military contractors and companies with access to energy grids. The report states the Chinese military hackers have systematically stolen hundreds of terabytes of data. China calls the allegations groundless. Israel's prime minister says North Korea's latest nuclear test is a warning that sanctions are not enough to stop Iran's atomic program. Benjamin Netanyahu made the statement to a gathering of international Jewish leaders Monday. He also said Iran will be at the top of his agenda when President Obama visits Israel.
Have sanctions, tough sanctions, stopped North Korea? No. And the fact that they produced a nuclear explosion reverberates everywhere in the Middle East and especially in Iran. Sanctions alone will not stop the nuclear program of Iran. They have to be coupled with a robust, credible military threat.
President Obama is set to visit Israel next month. Pat?
I'm a fan of Bibi Netanyahu. He's a good guy and he's a tough leader, but I think he only got 31 seats in the Knesset. They need 61 to form a majority. And the question is, he hasn't yet got the coalition he needs to put together a government. And so when Obama shows up, Netanyahu may be weakened unless in the next couple of weeks he can do some serious horse trading to get the people on board. But when he does that, he has to give things up. But that's the way it goes. The Israelis are very independent in their voting, and he does not have a majority to govern yet. Lee?
At Jerusalem's Israel Museum has unveiled the world's first exhibit of the life and legacy of King Herod the Great. It includes artifacts never seen before, and it shows why Herod is known as one of history's greatest builders. Chris Mitchell has that story.
If you ask most Christians who is King Herod, they will likely answer he was the king who tried to kill the baby Jesus by ordering the slaughter of all boys under the age of 2. Ancient historians go on to describe King Herod as a great builder and a paranoid ruler who executed his wife and 3 sons. But museum director James Snyder says there's more to the story.
It focuses more on his achievement as a builder, and it focuses more on his capability as a diplomat, balancing the needs of empire with the needs of local culture.
During his ruling, there was peace in the country, and there was work for everyone. There was no disemployment, and then people lived more or less in prosperity.
King Herod governed ancient Israel for 33 years under Roman rule. His most famous building project was the enlargement of the Temple Mount and the city of Jerusalem. Many of his building blocks were monumental stones like this one. Snyder says discovering Herod's tomb at Herodion 5 years ago triggered the exhibit.
That opened the opportunity to think across the whole of his history, the whole of his achievement. Jerusalem, Caesarea, Jericho, Masada, and of course Herodium, at first as a summer palace and then as a burial site.
We designed the exhibition like the people are going from Jericho to Herodion and talking about the person during the funeral procession, and then you can say everything that you think about the king, the good and the bad.
The intricate restoration included putting together what was believed to be Herod's sarcophagus from mere fragments, many the size of gravel. The exhibit includes mosaics, floors, and decors from Herod's palaces, jugs used to import wine, apples, and other food from Europe, and a VIP guest room at the top of his theater, likely used to entertain diplomatic guests. It's decorated with pictures of windows like this one that has taken nearly 3 years to reconstruct. There is also aerial footage of Herod's construction sites with 3D animation to show what his colossal buildings would have looked like. Snyder says it's the most ambitious archaeological exhibition ever undertaken by the museum. The $1 million exhibit will be on display until October. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Pat, it's incredible what archaeologists and historians have been able to accomplish in Israel.
It's simply amazing. You know, when I was in seminary, I had a course on biblical archaeology, and it is simply fascinating. And the big thing is that archaeology, with all of its technology, has never found an instance that I'm aware of that contradicted the Bible. When they finally go back and find out the real proof of what happened, it coincides with the biblical narrative. They say about Herod, you're better to be his horse than his son, because he killed off his sons, his relatives. So. He was a butcher, but yet built. I mean, Masada. You walked up to the top of that thing.
I did.
It's amazing. That was his summer palace.
You know, that's one of the joys, I think, of visiting Israel, is that you are walking not just on history, but I mean, literally, it's under your feet.
That's
right. They're constantly uncovering new things. It's a fascinating country.
This is an amazing achievement of the Israeli people, and we hope it draws many visitors.
Radical Islamists are stepping up attacks against Christians in the East African nation of Tanzania. Nina Shea of the Hudson Institute Center for Religious Freedom writes on National Review Online that 2 Christian leaders have been killed this month. A group calling itself Muslim Renewal took responsibility for killing a Catholic priest outside his church just before Mass. The group reportedly has ties to the terrorist group Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and they have promised to kill more, quote, infidels and burn their homes and churches at Easter time. World Compassion Ministry is issuing an urgent call for prayer for the release of an imprisoned Iraqi pastor. World Compassion's Dr. Terry Law says the Iraqi government arrested a man known as Pastor Jamal back in 2011 for his faith. He's now suffering serious medical problems, and the prison he's in does not have the equipment to treat him. Dr. Law is known for traveling to countries that are hostile to the gospel. He personally worked with Pastor Jamal delivering food to refugees in northern Iraq. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.